And our next guest has done that. Our next guest is a multiple award-winning singer-songwriter and recording artist, and he tours internationally with his band, the Jason Lee McKinney Band. He recently released a new album called One Last Thing, and his debut book is called Deciphering a Disciple's Doubt. I love that title. Jason Lee McKinney joins us now to help us examine faith through the lens of doubt. Jason, welcome to Hope Today.
How are you? It's good to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. We're going to be sharing some of your music a little later. But let me ask you about this title, because we've heard about deconstruction and how people, it's usually a term for people who've walked away from the faith. Could you explain your title, Deconstructing a Disciple's Doubt?
Yeah, I think doubt is can be a very positive thing. In fact, if the disciples never doubted what they expected the Messiah to be, they wouldn't have been open to Jesus, because Jesus certainly wasn't the Messiah that the early Christians expected, that Jews expected. They expected more of like a Maccabees military or political revolt to happen, and Jesus was anything but that. So we have to be willing to sort of look at things with a doubting eye. But the problem comes when we don't also doubt our doubts. When people move to a new worldview, they will often look critically only at the worldview they're leaving. So when someone's raised in church, they'll look critically at all the problems that they had with the church, or whether it's theological or personal hurt. But what they don't look to is challenging their own doubt. Is my doubt valid? Is my doubt, should it be given as much credence as I'm giving it? And so deconstructing a disciple's doubt is kind of mixing those things together, where we all deconstruct different views throughout our life. As we grow in the Lord, we're deconstructing, we're learning more. But we should look particularly harshly at our doubt. Not that there's anything wrong with having it, but we need to look at it critically as well.
Yeah, that is really good, because, and I know that that's your story, that you really tore down even your doubt part of your faith life, and then let the Lord rebuild that. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But tell me a little bit about your story, just so we can get to know you.
Okay, well, first of all, I eat from the 4 main food groups: candy, candy canes, candy corn, and syrup. So
praise the Lord.
I got to get an all reference in there too. So
Let's go, Elf.
no, I was raised sort of in the church, but it was a hellfire brimstone kind of thing, a lot of fear-based. And then my parents weren't really involved in church. My main influences as far as Christianity goes were my paternal grandparents. And they were amazing, but their church was pretty hardcore on the fear. And so I just remember being a little kid and thinking, I know that I don't want to go to hell. I don't know about anything else, but they've thoroughly convinced me that worms crawling in and out of my brain is probably a bad thing. And so I was raised with sort of fear and then not really involvement in church. And so I had my own experiences coming up, and failure through sin, and then some supernatural interactions that sort of led me to the Lord. And so a lot of this philosophical stuff didn't give me my faith, but it has talked me back into my faith multiple times, because I am a natural doubter. I don't have the natural gift of faith. My wife does, and it's super annoying, because she's like, the Lord's just going to work it out. And I'm like, I have to go through this sort of intellectual exercise to talk myself back into faith, which sounds bad, but I can say that the Lord has always been faithful to do that. And he's very patient with me.
I think just your little reference to Elf there it gives us an intro to your book, where you do that kind of thing a lot in the book. You have little scenarios from popular movies to help us understand hard concepts. I love the fact where you have a chapter on the problem of evil, and let's see, you have Doctor Strange, Loki, Doc Brown, and Dago Montoya, and a few other people kind of meet there and talk about what that all means. Where did you come up with this idea? Plus, you have your music in here with QR codes that people can go to hear one of your songs on YouTube right when they need to hear it for your story. Where did you come up with this idea?
Well, sort of from 2 places. One is, there's no way to talk about this stuff without it being on one level complex. It's high level stuff. It's deep stuff. You're talking about the origins of existence and the problem of evil. It's not easy to talk about, but I wanted to make it a little more palatable for people. So we're used to seeing things in entertainment forms, and all of these philosophical concepts are being communicated in modern entertainment. And so that's one thing, is it made it more palatable. And then the second thing about it is it's something that we're all familiar with anyway. So it takes these hard concepts and it breaks them down instantaneously. When we see something in film or we hear something in music, our brains are able to process hard concepts easier.
What do you think is one of the hardest concepts, like one of the biggest, most important questions that you answer in this book?
Well, answer's an interesting thing. I don't know if philosophically we can ever answer them, but the problem of evil is the one that gives people the most issue. They often say, "Why would a good God allow suffering?" And so I think that's one of the hard ones to go with. And there are really good evidences for why God would do that. In a really simple form, this interview, my young son is into basketball, my 9-year-old. And when he's practicing his left handed layups as a right handed player, it's frustrating for him because he's not left handed. But I don't remove that from him. He has to suffer through that so that he can learn. And that's the same thing. Perhaps one of the reasons God allows suffering is, we can't develop courage if there's nothing to be afraid of. We can't develop compassion if there's no one who's hurting. We can't develop perseverance if something isn't hard. And so God actually allows suffering so that we can develop into the people he needs us to be and wants us to be, and we were always meant to be.
Yeah, that is great, and it's what's interesting about that is we could not come to that place without that. We couldn't come to that place any other way. And just like your son couldn't do anything if he just shot with his right hand, he'd never develop that left-handed layup. Let me ask you about the word disciple, because it's in your title. Could you just break down for me? You have like 3 levels of followers of Christ that I thought was really key in understanding where we need to be.
Yeah, if I can use an analogy from music, you have ambient followers. He's that one guy that sings that one song. That's the kind of followers they are. They may have one song in a playlist, but yeah, that one guy that sings that one thing. Then you have engaged followers, which they will, if you have a new song come out, they may go check out the new song. Maybe if you're in town, they might come see you play if the ticket's cheap enough. But then you have disciples, and that is the people who wear the T-shirts and they buy every album and they stand in line for the show. And the point of that, spiritually speaking, is we are all disciples of something. And so we can only choose what we're a disciple of. And for truly to be a disciple of something, you have to be sold out. You have to be the brand champion. You're the one on top of the roof, screaming at the top of your lungs, "This is the greatest laundry detergent ever." Then you are a disciple of Tide, or if that's the greatest one. I don't know. I'm not saying it is, but for us, when people say, "Well, if you're a disciple, that means you're brainwashed," that's not necessarily true. It does mean you're indoctrinated. I am absolutely indoctrinated by Jesus. I freely admit that. I can choose whether or not I'm indoctrinated by him, but I can't choose whether or not I'm indoctrinated. But it doesn't mean I'm brainwashed, because I still have the ability to freely think. When you're brainwashed, that ability to freely think is taken away. You must follow. And a disciple is someone who desperately wants to follow with everything in them.
I think one of the key things you said earlier, and I think this alludes to it as well, is that a lot of times doubters don't doubt their doubts. They are hurt, like you said, or they have a question that a Sunday school teacher couldn't answer, or just said, "Well, you just have to believe it," and that's that. And so they wander off into this land of doubt, and there's lots of people that will pull them that way. But then they never say, "Well, hey, maybe this isn't right. It feels good. They kind of enter in, but maybe this isn't the place I need to dwell." What would you say to someone who's watching now who has doubts, who says, "I don't understand this about God, and I don't understand this about what I see in Christians," and they're drifting towards that land of doubt? What should they do?
Well, a lot of times people are looking for a perfect worldview where everything works out and you're in some sort of angelic, if I can use Lord of the Rings, where the elves sail off into the land where everything is perfect. And that's not going to happen on this side of earth. So whatever worldview you're moving towards, it's going to have problems as well. And we're talking about probabilities and plausibilities. You and I know that knowledge wise, I can't prove God. Now, I can be experientially certain, but I can't knowledge be certain. But when you start stacking up these worldviews, please look as critically at the worldview you're moving towards, especially if it doesn't include God as the one you're leaving. Because I think that if you look at them fairly and humbly, you're going to find far more problems in a worldview without God than you are one with God.
You know, Jason, I just love like what you're sharing with us, the wisdom and insight. And I just have a question for you. Is just when was the moment that you decided I'm going to be a sold out disciple of Jesus? That moment, we all come to that valley of decision where we can choose to surrender. So when was that moment for you when you said, you know what, I am totally sold out for him?
Well, I don't think it was one moment for me. It's been many moments over and over again. I've had to make that choice over and over again. So there was the point of salvation, and then there's varying points of surrender. So I don't think it's a choice we make once. I think it's a choice we make over and over again, and almost daily. That I'm going to wake up and I'm still going to be a disciple of Jesus. And that's, we'll read the verse later. That's why I love that verse that we picked, John 6:67 and 68. It's because it is that choice over and over again.
Okay, in this, what's trending right now is deconstructing your faith. And we're seeing a lot of believers, they were believers, kind of walking away from their faith. How do you address that?
Well, one, I think that the church could be handling it a little better, in big C, not any particular little c, in that we shouldn't panic about it. Deconstructions happen all the time. My theology has changed some from the time I was first a believer. That's a deconstruction. When I got married, I learned that I did not roll the toothpaste tube correctly. I had to deconstruct that belief. My wife had to educate me on that. And so all deconstructions aren't bad. In fact, questions are good. One of my favorite passages in the Bible is Matthew 11:2-10, where John the Baptist is in jail and he's getting ready to be put to death, and he kind of knows that's what's going to happen, right? And he has doubts, but he does a couple things that are really important. He doesn't doubt in isolation. He tells somebody. He tells his disciples, and then he sends his disciples to Jesus to go ask him, right? And then when they get to Jesus, Jesus does a couple things. He gives evidence. And so he doesn't panic. He doesn't say, tell John he should know better. Tell John, because Jude 22 says we should be patient with those who doubt. And then the other thing Jesus does is he defends John and he gives honor to John. And so he turns to the crowd and says, I think that we should, as long as somebody's still seeking the truth, we should defend and honor them and give evidence and be patient with them and doubting. I think that's the church's challenge. But to the people who are doubting, there's theological doubts. I don't understand something about God. Well, go have conversations. Seek out the truth. Don't just study people who are naysayers. I mean, you should study people who don't agree with you, but study the fathers of the faith. Go back and study apologists. So that's one side. The other side of it is be honest with yourself. Are you really having a crisis of faith because of something theological? Or is there either something in your life that is sinful that you just want to do and you don't want anyone to tell you no? Because one of the problems that we have in a modern Christianity is we don't want Jesus to tell us no to anything. We don't want God to tell us no. And C.S. Lewis says this, that we want God to just be kind, but love is more severe than kindness. Love sometimes tells you no because it wants the best for you.
Wow.
And so are we just running from something or are we running towards something? And I would be cautious if we're running towards something, the truth, a higher level of truth, and theological questions can drive us to a deeper understanding of God. If we're just running from something because we want to do something we know we shouldn't, or we have a question about a friend of ours, or we have personal hurt that somebody dies and there's something we don't understand. So we don't understand why they died of cancer. So we want to run from God. That's when you're in trouble because you're not really running towards something. You're just running away.
Boy, Jason, it is so good. The book is called Deconstructing a Disciple's Doubt. I highly recommend it. There's a lot. Be prepared to dig in, but it's enjoyable as you dig in. Jason, thank you so much. You have multiple careers here. You write, you teach, you sing. And so we're going to, just as we leave you, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
We are going to go to Jason McKinney Band, the video Without End.
You're uncreated and undefeated. Words can't contain your transcendence. While everything else it is wasting away, you hold the darkness and you are the day. You're universal and you are unique. You're absolute but in everything. You are unknowable and make yourself known. You have no rival, you are God alone. But the greatest thing about you is you came to save. The greatest thing about you is you defeated the grave. The greatest thing about you is you call me by name. You're the center and the circumference. Love with no beginning and without end. You are the cause and the effects, bigger than reason, beyond intellect. The only true creative with no need to feel. Father, Son, Spirit, you create out of will. You pre-exist in nothing and eternity. You're infinite and you're right here with me. You are self-existing and self-evident. Time does not have you, no, you have it. But the greatest thing about you is you came to save. The greatest thing about you is you defeated the grave. The greatest thing about you is you call me by name. You're the center and the circumference. Love with no beginning and without end. You're uncreated and undefeated. Words can't contain your transcendence. While everything else it is wasting away, you hold the darkness and you are the day. But the greatest thing about you is you came to save. The greatest thing about you is you defeated the grave. The greatest thing about you is you call me by name. You're the center and the circumference. Love with no beginning and without end. You're the center and the circumference. Love with no beginning and without end.